In 2020, black voters in Georgia came out in historic numbers and helped deliver a victory in the Peach State to President Biden. But the backlash was fierce and swift as Donald Trump and his sycophants targeted election workers with baseless lies and allegations of fraud and misconduct, which was life-changing in the very worst way for some of those involved.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one.
And that targeting and abuse, it's now included in Georgia DA Fani Willis's searing indictment of Donald Trump. Now, justice may be different things to different people, but in an op-ed for MSNBC, my next guest said, quote, "In Georgia, the people spoke loudly in 2020, and not even Trump could drown them out." Joining me now is LaTosha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. LaTosha, it's always an honor to have you on the show. Your op-ed, a steering reminder of civic responsibility for all of us. At one point in it, you say, "My grandfather carried an old poll tax receipt in his wallet to remind him that the right to vote didn't come easy and it wasn't guaranteed." Talk me through why you feel this reminder of this moment of our nation's history and why this op-ed was needed so much so and now.
Good morning, Katie. Thank you for having me. I think that we have to really recognize what we're up against in this moment. That while, yes, it is a significance that we have a twice impeached president who is actually being charged, as he should, around a conspiracy to actually overthrow or change the results of the election, there is a greater underlying issue that we have right now. One, we have to really recognize the fragility of democracy in this country right now. As I mentioned in my op-ed, my grandfather was born in 1905 in Alabama, and for years, the majority of his life, my grandmother was 1910, the majority of his life, he couldn't vote. And so when he did get the right to vote, it was something that he had great pride in. They would actually dress up to be able to go to the voting polls and would take me with them because it had such a sense of pride. But what we have now is what we're seeing leaders at the highest level, which is really a playbook from fascism, that are intimidating, using the tool of intimidation for election workers to actually discourage not only election workers, but voters to not participate in their democratic process. And so what I wanted to do in the op-ed is to really raise the alarm that this is much greater than Trump, and we need to stop and pay attention to what is happening right now. Secondly, that we need protections to make sure that we're strengthening our democratic rights and that we have protection around our democratic rights. And three, that we have to radically reimagine what it is going to take to make sure that as we're building a multiracial, multi-generational democracy, what do we need in place to protect the interests and the democratic rights of all individuals in this nation?
And let's talk about that intimidation, because many election workers have left those jobs, those positions, after facing political pressure or even threats of violence, especially in the wake of the 2020 election. Fani Willis's notable inclusion, I think, of harassed election workers Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss marks the highest profile efforts yet to hold people accountable for targeting this particular population. So do you think that this is just the start of accountability?
I do. I think that this is a long line of those who have sought to hold them accountable. I think one way that we hold them accountable is at the voting booths, that we have to show up in record numbers, and those leaders who have been bad players, who have not really supported democratic rights of the people of this nation, we have to hold them accountable and move them out of office. Secondly, we need a federal Voting Rights Act. We have been screaming, those of us that have been voting rights activists have been screaming as we are embarking upon the 60th anniversary on the March on Washington. One of the core parts and requests was that there was a Voting Rights Act that was strong, that the protection of voting rights, that we would actually have the protection of that. And so I think we have to revisit that as well. And then third, we need some additional tools to make sure that those who are actually doing this, that they're held to account. And so I am really happy about the courage that Fani Willis has shown in Georgia to hold and bring these conspirators to account.
LaTosha, talk about the defenders of democracy and why this is such an important moment. You have been on the ground, not only in Georgia, but in other states, making sure that voters, that the value of their vote is not disenfranchised in any way. So what does it mean to you that they're finally seeing days in court for what they've done, the people that have violated that trust?
You know, I'll take Ruby Freeman, and this is a woman that made $16 an hour, that people showed up to her house to harass her and say that wanted her to actually intimidate her, to tell her to make a false statement. She was actually out helping her daughter. When you're looking at this process, this is a woman who now says that she can't even go anywhere feeling safe or comfortable because she was targeted and was harassed at $16 an hour. Like, at the end of the day, it takes a lot of courage for someone actually to be able to say that, no, I'm going to have integrity and I'm going to stand in this process. I'm going to tell the truth. My grandmother used to say, the truth shall set you free. But it's not only on that level. We've seen that all across the board, even in the state of Georgia. There have been election officials who that the state Republicans of the state basically took over the county election boards and really removed. There were scores of people who have been doing this work for years who were removed from the election boards in Georgia. People like Helen Butler, who have been doing this work for over 20 plus years, that were targeted and were removed off of the board, you know, in this attempt to say, oh, no, we're just changing the entire board. We also have had workers. I've actually had one of my employees that was just simply outside as part of our team, literally telling people to register to vote, to go out and vote the election day, and a gun was pulled on her. That's happened several times. So people really recognize that we're in this space, that there are those that have been in the Republican Party that are using intimidation and fear to at every level, right? They're using the legal ramifications. They're using the organizing ramifications as well to get people to not participate.
Well, maybe that day of reckoning is finally upon those bad actors. LaTosha Brown, as always, it's a privilege to have you here. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.